Chers internautes, bonjour. Nous sommes aujourd'hui en compagnie de Ken O'Keefe. Bonjour Ken.
Hello, thank you.
Thank you to accept to answer my questions because it's very late now and both we want to sleep, but we are here for a very short time and it's a pleasure for me to ask you a few questions because you are very famous in USA, in Iran, but not so in the French, in France for example. So my first question, because you are an activist and you used to be a Marine before, so how a Marine can become a militant or activist?
Well, this is actually a pattern that we see that many of the most effective and influential peace activists are in fact ex-soldiers who've served in war. Because if anything is going to develop your understanding of how horrible war really is, it's actually being in a war and experiencing it firsthand. So it's not completely unusual for someone to go through the same kind of evolution that I have. But for me, you know, like every other American, I grew up with the idea that my nation was the greatest in the world, and you know, I didn't really join the Marine Corps to be a hero or anything like that. I just thought I was lacking discipline and initiative. You know, I was raised by my mother. She didn't really punish me for anything, and I pretty much did everything that I wanted. So I now realize that I joined the Marine Corps because my father wasn't really around, and this was the father that I never really had, and that's pretty much why I joined the Marine Corps. I did not know that at the time. I was totally naive, totally ignorant, didn't realize at all what I was doing. It was the greatest thing that could have happened to me, but it was a difficult lesson to learn, to find out that what I thought the Marine Corps was all about, honor and integrity, it wasn't, because when I spoke out about abuse of power, and
You've been a Marine for 3 years,
3.
And at what time? And did you went to a war theater, or not theater, but
yes, I joined the Marine Corps at the age of 19 in 1989, and I spent 3 years in the Marine Corps, and I was sent off to the first Gulf War in 1991, early 1991 or late 90, and I was in Kuwait and Saudi Arabia, mostly Kuwait, for 6 months. And it wasn't really the so-called war, which it really wasn't a war as much as it was a slaughter. I mean, you know, we slaughtered, our pilots slaughtered, you know, probably at least 20,000, if not more, retreating Iraqis that were driving on the so-called highway of death that connected Kuwait City to Baghdad. So I didn't experience the worst horrors of war, you know. I didn't need to, quite frankly, but I thank God that I didn't have to do that, and I certainly thank God that I didn't have to kill anybody myself. I know that I did not personally kill anybody. And I don't know if I would have recovered had I done that, because I don't know if I could have escaped the fact that really, especially if we were in Iraq, you know, we would have been killing people that were only doing what I would have been doing had I been in their shoes. And certainly if I had killed any women or children, that would have been very difficult. Maybe I would have been one of the many who comes home from wars like this and ends up committing suicide. Or drinking, yeah.
And so when did you reach the point that you want to involve yourself for a cause?
Well, what happened to me is I spoke out about abuse of power in the Marine Corps, and I basically reported my superiors for violating the tenet of leadership by example. And at that point I believed that the Marine Corps was about honor and integrity and leadership by example. But when I spoke out, I ended up being punished very severely. I did it openly. I admitted that I was the one. I didn't do it secretly, and I made an active decision to acknowledge that I am the one who reported my superiors. And I was really quite naive. Maybe if I knew the consequences, I might not have done it that way. I'd like to think that I would have. But my life became extremely difficult, very, very difficult, very unfair. I was looking over my shoulders constantly. You know, I had reason to fear for my safety, and the person who was directly in charge of me hated me and made my life hell, and punished our entire platoon.
For how many years?
Well, I had still 2 more years left by the time this happened, roughly. And you know, if you've ever seen the movie Full Metal Jacket, a classic movie by Stanley Kubrick, he's punishing Private Pyle. He's overweight, and he punishes Private Pyle, and that doesn't work, and eventually he punishes the entire platoon. They know, however, that they're being punished because of Private Pyle. Well, my platoon sergeant did the same thing. He punished the entire platoon, and they knew they were being punished because of me. And so this was very difficult. This was the first real taste of injustice that I ever experienced. And I realized that everything I thought was true about the Marine Corps, at least in my experience, was not true. And if I wasn't correct about the Marine Corps, what else was I not correct about? And that's when I was in the right frame of mind to start receiving information that I wouldn't have been willing or able to receive previous to that. So the trauma of having to experience injustice for having done the right thing was the trauma that I needed to be able to see the truth. And when I got out of the Marine Corps, I vowed that I would never give up my freedom again, and that I would exercise my freedom to the hilt. And I commenced to a course of independent study, and I read books like Burying My Heart at Wounded Knee, which talks about the genocide and the lies that we perpetrated against the Native Americans that we'd never owned up to, really, as a nation. I read the autobiography of Malcolm X, A People's History of the United States, by Howard Zinn. And the further I got into it, the further I realized virtually everything that I had been told was a lie.
So did you, at this point, did you consider yourself still as a patriot?
Actually, I realized after probably a couple years of outside of the Marine Corps, I started taking a few college classes that I was interested in. And one of them was American history from a black perspective, and I really remember very vividly, this was the thing that took me over the edge. When I took that course, I have to give some history. When I was younger, I was, you know, a middle-class white kid, you know, growing up in suburbia, a charmed existence, really, in San Diego in Southern California, and they ended up, I was in the school at the time where they started busing us comparatively rich white kids to the poor black neighborhood 1 day a week for what they called integration.
Integration, yeah.
And I always kind of was a bit of a troublemaker and got into scrapes, and when I ended up going to the poor black neighborhood, I got into some scrapes with the black kids, and it always started out, you know, one-on-one. You know, like some kid had a problem with me and I had a problem with him, and we started to get into it physically. And before I knew it, I was fighting 2 or 3 or 4 black kids. And this made me really angry, really angry. I did not like that at all. And I didn't know anything about the black experience. So I just ended up developing some real prejudices towards black people. And I even flirted with white supremacist organizations, and I didn't go down that path, but I could have. You know, I was close to going down that path. And had I gone down that path, with the ability I have as a speaker, I might have been a really effective leader in any kind of white supremacist movement. So I don't, you know, I'm very grateful for this, because I look at those people who gravitate towards white supremacism, who hate immigrants and blacks and all this white people. And while I completely obviously disagree with their conclusions, I can remember how I felt and understand how they get to that point. And, you know, only by the grace of God did I go a different path. But by the time I got out of the Marine Corps and started my course of independent study, and read the autobiography of Malcolm X, and then got to this course, American History from a Black Perspective, and then started getting deeper into the horrendous injustice that we have committed and continue to commit against black people in America, I realized how very angry I would have been if I were born black in America and had to deal with this kind of racism. And I remember very vividly, while I was taking that course, I decided at some point I would renounce my U.S. citizenship, because I felt such shame and anger at having been fooled into believing all of these lies, even joining the Marine Corps and potentially killing or being killed for these lies. And it was my developing understanding of the black experience that really took me over the edge. And this was, I think, 1994, perhaps, 1993. And it took me several years, but eventually, in March of 2001, I finally did renounce my U.S. citizenship formally, which is a whole process in itself. And I did it for this reason. I needed, for my own peace of mind, to have my name removed from the list of citizens, because citizens, and I looked into what is a citizen is involved in a social contract. And under that contract, you have supposedly rights and you have obligations. And I do not agree to the obligations of paying taxes into a system that is being used to perpetuate all sorts of injustices, including continuous injustice towards black people and other minorities based on a racist ideology that literally translates to young black men being killed on a regular basis by armed cops, even when they themselves are unarmed. And that's only one aspect of the shame that any American who has any kind of conscience must feel for the types of things that we have done throughout our history. We can go on and on and on about all the crimes we've committed, but for me, I needed to renounce for my own peace of mind, and it took a while, but eventually I did.
Okay, so after reading books, your first action was to refuse your American ID?
No. I mean, I went through a period of several years of, activism. At first, it was marine conservation. I did a lot of work protecting the marine environment, and I got involved in the Hawaiian independence movement. But then, yes, I did. I renounced eventually.
Okay. So after, can you tell, because you have been involved in the second war in Iraq, you have been involved in the Human Shield movement. You have launched this movement. Can you tell us how the Human Shield movement was born, and what were the consequences of this movement?
Well, the internet was kind of young at that time. I mean, it was around, it had been around, but it was still pretty young. And I was, at that point in my life, I was definitely I'm still angry, but I mean, I was at a very angry stage. I knew that the invasion of Iraq was based on a pack of lies. I also knew that the decision to invade Iraq had been decided long ago, and I knew that protests, I don't care how big they were not going to stop the invasion of Iraq. And it angered me that Western people were not willing to acknowledge, number one, that this was not going to stop the war, and two, that if we really wanted to stop it, we would have to do more. We'd have to put our lives on the line, I mean, if we're really serious. So I thought about that, and I looked to other examples of what people did, activists did, that I really admired, and I remembered stories about Americans going into Central America, in particular to Nicaragua and El Salvador, and they went into villages and lived in these villages as a means to try and protect them from American trained forces that were just nothing more than death squads. And
at what time was in Nicaragua and in Salvador, Guatemala? These at what time?
Well, these people were doing this sort of thing in the 80s and primarily the 80s. And I admired that. I also remembered, you may recall, after 9/11, Israel didn't waste much time before it started its madness in the West Bank. And you may remember the siege of the Church of the Nativity, the church in Bethlehem that many Christians believe Jesus Christ was born at that location. And anyway, the Israelis surrounded the Church of the Nativity. This is 2002. And basically, you know, the only people in there were some Palestinians and militants who had went into the church seeking some sort of refuge. And they were surrounded by the Israelis. And the Israelis were going to go in and slaughter them. But what ended up happening was some activists who were in Palestine, in the West Bank at that time, managed to run into the church. And this just changed the whole equation. The Israelis couldn't just go in there and kill everybody anymore.
Because of their image.
Because of, yes, public relations wise, it would not look good when everyone knew, the whole world knew. I don't remember how many activists ran into the church, but it was a considerable number, and that just changed everything. It really did. And ultimately, they negotiated a way for them to come out alive, and those activists saved the lives of not only the armed Palestinians, but you know, the priests and the other people who were in the church. And that was fresh in my mind. And I admired that deeply, you know, and that was a courageous and correct thing to do. So I took from that example, and I concluded that if I was serious about trying to prevent the invasion and occupation of Iraq, the slaughter that was coming, the best thing that we could do is migrate Western citizens, migrate to Iraq in large numbers. I thought that if we got 10,000 people, that would be sufficient. 10,000 people out of a population in the West of roughly 1 billion, 10,000 is not that many people.
True.
It's really not. And if we could get 10,000 people to migrate to Iraq and position themselves at places that are unquestionably supposed to be protected by the 4 Geneva Conventions, sites that are critical to the civilian population, sites such as water treatment facilities, power plants which are needed to, you know, produce the electricity to pump the water in the first place, food storage sites, things like this are not supposed to be attacked according to international law, and it is a war crime to do so. But this happens all the time. We see this all the time. All the time. It's happening right now in Syria. The oil wells that they're hitting, that is the infrastructure, that's the income for the Syrian people. If you get rid of that, if you bomb that, it's going to harm the Syrian people. They will also be bombing water treatment facilities and power plants, make no mistake about it, and they'll get away with it. I made the argument that the only way we could stop this war crime from occurring is getting significant numbers of Western citizens to go and position themselves in these places. And so what I did was I decided to write the most intelligent, compelling call to action I could, and in that call to action, I laid out my reasons why I felt this could work. And at that time, indie media was sort of the big thing. Indie media was like the equivalent of, you know, the blogging and alternative news websites of today. Indie media was both indie media international and then local indie medias all over the world. So indie media Los Angeles, indie media London, indie media Dublin. And what I did was I wrote my call to action, and I sat there for many hours, many hours, and I submitted this to each one of those. And every free press release thing that I could find, I just sat there, actually day after day, and I just kept posting that call to action everywhere that I could. And, you know, as it turned out, it resonated with people, and I started getting communications from people. They were interested, but at the point where it was just me making a call to action, I was just some nutcase, you know, like I'm going to go to Iraq and be a human shield, come join me, you know, and you know, there were a lot of people who were interested.
How many people joined your?
Well, I'll get to that. I'll get to that. Initially, you know, I had a lot of interest, but eventually, and this is a magical moment when you have an idea. This is in itself potentially very powerful, but when you take that idea and you physically carry out the plan, the idea, that takes it to another level. But the real magic moment is when you have an idea and someone else decides they're going to participate. Now you have two people, you have synergy, and that becomes extremely powerful. And I did. I had one person who finally said, I'm going to join you, a Kiwi, a lovely guy, one of my best friends to this day. And, you know, he was the second crazy one to say, you know, I'm coming. And before you know it, I actually got a call from the BBC of all places. And they invited me to London to do an interview for one of their programs called Heaven and Earth. And before you knew it, all of a sudden it just started to explode. And I was getting so many different communications I couldn't possibly keep up. And very quickly I was getting interview requests from all over the place. In fact,
so BBC, in fact, they make you your ad.
They did. I despise the BBC, but they literally, unwittingly, you know, provided me one of the initial platforms that helped me launch this. But it wasn't the BBC as much as it was, and this is really important, you know, that I took the time and just posted a compelling argument all over that was the real power. Mm-hmm. The BBC just picked up on it because they saw some sort of utility for me to come on their program. And anyway, you know, I was being interviewed left, right, and center, all over the place. I did my first BBC Hard Talk interview in that period. I was doing interviews all the time. I was working on average at least 18, 20-hour days, and sometimes 24-hour days. It was non-stop. And I had to take, people volunteered, so I took volunteers. And this was the death of my action without knowing it yet.
Okay, why?
Well, because the powers that be know that the outside threats can only do so much. In order to really destroy something that has the power to do something really, really important. And I'll make this argument to anybody. The powers that be knew my plan better than my allies did. And they knew that if I were successful and managed to get large numbers of people to position themselves at places that they knew they were always going to hit, they were always going to hit these, they were always going to commit war crimes. And people were saying, oh, they don't want to hit the infrastructure, they want to keep it in, oh, whatever, you buy that stuff. I never bought that, and it was never true. They were always intending to commit these war crimes. And they knew damn well that if there were large numbers of Western citizens there, that was going to be a big problem. In fact, they wouldn't be able to do it. It would not work at all. They would not be able to deny that this was a war crime if Western body parts were mixed with Iraqi body parts. It's not the kind of thing they could have just swept under the carpet. So they did what they always do. They sent their infiltrators in, and they come in as volunteers. And they do some good work. They're not stupid. There's a science to this. The volunteers will come, they'll do some hard work, they'll make friends with other volunteers, and they'll start to develop a rapport with people. They'll get on the inside in a good position, and little by little they will start planting these seeds of destruction, and they will, and they did in this case, make a very coordinated, timed effort to completely marginalize me, to remove me from the equation, because I clearly was the one that had the capacity to attract even larger and larger numbers of people. And if they could marginalize me, if they could get rid of me as the leader and help get other people to come in and be the spokespersons, then they would weaken this from the inside. It's a very, very effective tactic. It's used all the time. Pretty much every big organization you can name is infiltrated and run by subverters.
Even indie media, because you talk about indie media, and in France we have Indie Media Paris,
yes.
And our organization was attacked on an article, big article from one guy who published on Indie Media. It's not the whole website, but one guy on Indie Media,
yes.
who claimed he's from extreme left, but in fact he's a Zionist undercover.
Yep.
And he made a very hard article against us. Very well on the top page of Google when you type our name and it creates us a lot of problems. But
yes, absolutely. If we don't understand the methods of infiltration and subversion, then we're fools, and we'll constantly be harmed and victimized by this strategy. It's a very effective strategy, and this was my introduction to it. And you know, I could get into all the details of what happened, but that's a long story. I could write a book on that alone, and probably at some point I should. But nonetheless, they were successful in marginalizing me. They hijacked. We ended up having 3 double-decker buses that were traveling from London to Baghdad. This was all part of my plan, and the reason why I did it that way was the public spectacle to get. You can't ignore it. You can't ignore that thing. And to buy 3 double-decker buses, I mean, you could buy a double-decker bus for a couple £1,000. The bang for your buck, as we say in America, is unbeatable. You know, the public exposure you'll get with a bus painted with big graphics and heading from London to Baghdad, you're guaranteed to get a lot of attention. And we did that, and as soon as we set off, a manipulation occurred that separated me from the buses. I was off in Amsterdam appearing for an event that we were invited to, and as soon as I left Paris to go to Amsterdam, the infiltrators, the subverters, manipulated the rest of the mostly good-intentioned people and saying, oh, we have to go, we have to go. And so they left Paris and started heading down south, in the south of France. And I ended up getting calling to say, okay, we'll be back in Paris tomorrow. Oh, we've left. What do you mean you've left? and literally the entire journey from that point forward was a circus. And I was actually separated from the vast majority of the people. 2 of the buses went one direction and my bus went another direction. I mean, they were all mine. I mean, they were all organized by me, but the one that I had physically bought myself with my own driver that I had organized specifically, that was the one I was on. And again, I could go on and on about all the things that happened, but they were successful. They were, first it created a big distraction, the story, which the media was wanting to pounce on that, you know. Look at them, you know, they're going to save a dictator, and now they're already fighting amongst themselves, and the people who join the mission already hate the leader, and da-da-da-da-da, you know, and it was, you know, a vicious slander campaign, and, you know, you had like the Telegraph newspaper in London completely misquoting me. They quoted me as if I was George Bush. They said, I said to the people on the mission, if you're not with me, you're against me, a la George Bush. And they quoted me as saying there are dark forces around me that are trying to hurt me. I never said anything like this. They just made me sound like some sort of crazed maniac. And it worked. It worked quite well. By the time we actually got to Baghdad, and I actually never even regrouped with the buses. I did for a very short period, and we got separated again. And so I ended up, the buses went all the way through Europe, which nobody paid any attention to us, really, very little. And then they got into Turkey, and there was a massive reception in Turkey, and then through Syria, another massive reception. I wasn't involved in any of that. I was separated. And eventually, I was able to get to Syria after the buses had gone into Baghdad, and I literally had to hire a taxi, and the taxi took me into Iraq, and he needed to sleep, and basically I drove the taxi the last distance into Baghdad in the middle of the night. Nobody was there, nobody greeted me, and I never had a real big reception. My only hope was that I would get support from the government, Saddam Hussein's government, but I didn't get that either, because I had spoken very honestly about Saddam Hussein, and admitted the obvious truth, that he was a murderer and a dictator. And I'm really not aware, and I mean that's all there for the public record. People can go and see the interviews that I did and confirm. I'm not aware of anybody who said those types of things and actually went to Iraq under Saddam Hussein. Plenty of people said it, but they definitely didn't go to Iraq, you know. And I mean, this was already very dangerous for me, but I knew I had to do that, because if I ignored the questions about, well, aren't you going to support a brutal dictator who's torturing and gassing and, you know, killing his own people? If I didn't acknowledge that this was true, that yes, he had done this, then we would have been apologists for a dictator, and they would have destroyed us. So I didn't really have a choice. but I'm a truth teller anyway, so I was never going to, this was never about Saddam Hussein, protecting him. It was about protecting the people of Iraq. So Saddam Hussein didn't like me. I was never invited to the palace, and I didn't get any support from him. And when I got to Baghdad, it was incredible what happened. I was accused of being CIA, you know, my life was in serious danger. I literally, my back went out, the stress was so immense, I've never experienced such stress in my life. I realized that I had created I was a Dr. Frankenstein, had created a Frankenstein. I was now in Iraq and was almost assuredly going to die in Iraq as the leader of a dipshit movement of people who were just clueless idiots going to support a dictator. And that was literally what I was facing, and I thought, you know, I would die down there, but...
So it was an experience from which you have learned a lot.
I have learned a lot, yeah.
How did it end? Is there somebody in the group who died, or...?
I think, you know, the best estimates of how many human shields got, I mean, it was, despite all of this, it was growing. If we hadn't been so infiltrated, who knows how many people we would have got, but credible figures put the number at somewhere probably around 500 people came to be human shields, despite all of this. So, I mean, if we had been organized, if we had been working together, we probably could have got 10,000, or certainly a few thousand. And this would have been very powerful indeed. But as it turns out, you know, Saddam Hussein wanted us to do stuff that no way could we do it. One of the things they told us was we could not declare publicly where we were going to position ourselves. Now immediately I knew, no way, because all they have to do if they want to, this is keep in mind Saddam Hussein, who if he's wanting to save his ass, he'll do anything. So if he needed to, what he could do is a place that either was bombed or not bombed, they could simply move us to that location and bomb it themselves, or just, you know, since America already bombed it, bring us there, kill us, you know, with explosives, and then bring their media and say, look, they killed all. They could easily do that. But if we declared we're going to this point, then he couldn't do that. You know, I mean, if America bombed us, okay, but he'd have to try and bomb us himself and all this sort of, it would make it much more difficult for him. And so I knew this, but you know, I had already lost control, and I couldn't speak totally openly. I couldn't say in Baghdad to the whole group of people, listen, the reason why we can't do what they're asking us to do is because they could murder us all and use us as props to help save Saddam's. I couldn't say that. Come on. So, you know, it was an incredibly difficult situation, and I did everything I could to stop the, really, it was a circus, for Christ's sake, and people were being manipulated in such ridiculous directions. I did everything I could to try and stop us from being manipulated. After all, I had created this monster, and now, you know, I felt responsible. So I did everything I could, and eventually Saddam Hussein saved my life, quite frankly, because he kicked me out of the country. And I tried to resist. I actually, in a very tense, you know, scene at a big hotel in Baghdad, the Iraqis announced that I and 4 other people were being deported out of the country. And I managed to get away from the Iraqi secret police. I managed in a scuffle to like get into a car and go somewhere else secretly. And they found me within like 12 hours. They knew where we were, and they took me out of the country. And you know, I did everything. I didn't feel good about leaving at all, and I tried to stay, but he kicked me out. And I knew very well that there was a better chance that I was going to die there if I was there after the invasion, because I knew what I would have done. I would have been out in the streets, I would have been out filming, and I would have been screaming as loud as I could, okay, I hope you're happy with this, here we are, murdering more innocent people. And he kicked me out of the country, and I went to Jordan. And after that experience, to be honest, I went back to London. I was invited to London, and I needed like a good year or 2 to recover from the whole thing.
Okay, let's talk about. You don't want to add anything about this story?
No, other than as you say, it was an incredible lesson. But I would make the same mistake again many years later. But anyway, I did learn lessons.
Okay, so about the boats for Gaza, can you tell us what you've seen and what you've done in the boats?
Well, I decided that I really wanted to go on that journey. I was really impressed with the Turks' ability to buy this ship, the Mavi Marmara, which was a ship, a proper ship. And I was fortunate that they knew enough about me that they felt no problem. They let me on at a very late stage of the mission. Mm-hmm. And once I was on the ship, I was nobody. I was just a normal person. I wasn't any kind of leader or anything like that. I was just like everybody else. I was there for the same reasons. And there were a lot of journalists, a lot of people with cameras and whatnot. And as we were sailing towards Gaza, one of the Turkish leaders asked me if I would like to participate in defending the ship. And even while I had my own cameras and whatnot, I felt like, well, yeah, sure. I mean, I think I would be more useful defending the ship if it were necessary. And I didn't think the Israelis would do it. They eventually did, but I felt that would be a better use of my abilities because, again, there were lots of people with cameras and whatnot. So as far as I know, I was the only white person. I don't recall any other white people. There were British Muslims, but they weren't white. I don't remember anybody else who was white.
On your boat or
on the ship?
Every boat?
Yeah, well, no other ship defended. Mm-hmm. No other ship actually physically defended their own ship or their own boat. Okay. It was only the Mavi Marmara that defended the ship. So, I mean, this was, in itself, it was a great honor to be asked. Obviously there must be some level of trust to invite me. And part of the reason why they invited me to defend the ship was they knew I had a military background and, they felt confident, I guess, that I was,
And in the activist, a lot of people like me did not make the army,
Yes, yeah. I mean, I felt honored to be asked, and I accepted that. And what they did was they put us in 6-person teams, and each team was assigned to a certain area of the ship. And in the team I was in, there was a Turkish leader, and they actually made me the second in command of the 6-person team, which again was a great honor. And they assigned us to the back of the ship, the stern of the ship. And everybody was assigned to a different area. So there were people obviously assigned to the top deck, which is where many were killed. So we were at the back of the ship, and it was the middle of the night when the Israelis first they began the attack.
By helicopter?
No, they started with boats, the Zodiacs. And they came with their Zodiacs and attempted to board by throwing a rope, a ladder rope over the side, but they weren't able to do that. When they got close, people were throwing objects at them, and if they tried to throw something up onto the rails of the ship, they were just thrown back. They were not able to board the ship that way.
That lasts for how many hours or minutes?
That probably lasted 15 minutes, 20 minutes maybe. Mm-hmm. And then they came with the helicopters. And I remember very well when the helicopters came. I was at the back of the ship, but I could see the helicopters up over the top deck. And they threw a rope out over the helicopter. And this was something that I had done in the Marine Corps. It's not rappelling or abseiling, as they say in England. It's fast roping. You don't actually attach to the rope. You wear gloves, and yes, you hold on to the rope like this, and then you take your feet and you put your feet together at the rope at the bottom, and you slide down the rope. So you're not attached, and when you get to the bottom, immediately you can release, and you can use your weapon and whatnot. I knew that this was a problem because you could get onto the ship very quickly like this. And I actually went, we were at the back of the ship, and that was protected. There was really nothing going on there at that point. They had pretty much stopped even trying to board from the Zodiacs at that point. And all attention was at the helicopter and the top deck. And I actually went to the leader of my team and said, listen, I want to go up there. He said, okay, go ahead. And I started to walk up, run up to the top deck. And when I got up to the second deck, not the top deck, but the deck below that one, I got to the door, the last door that you get to before you could go up to the top. Mm-hmm. And when I got to that door, with incredible timing, one of the defenders of the ship, or however many defenders of the ship, actually pushed one of the commandos over the top level, and he fell down almost right in front of me from the top deck. As he fell, I saw him fall right in front of me. I saw that he had a weapon, a 9mm pistol, and as he fell to the ground, I immediately went for that weapon. And he was not in, he had been beaten up a bit. He wasn't in the greatest shape, so he was not difficult to deal with at all. And I managed to get that pistol off of him, and he was pulled inside the ship by some other brothers, and I had this pistol in my hand, and we had been told, you know, you could throw weapons overboard if you got them, and but there was just something in me that said, no, I mean, this is evidence. And I had already, by that point, had actually seen one dead person. They had already killed one person.
Were you not afraid that if you have a weapon, they will be more violent against the passenger?
I wasn't afraid at all, to be honest. You know, I just did what I felt was the right thing to do.
All happened very quickly in this kind of...
Yes. I mean, in retrospect, I look at it as dangerous for me personally and potentially dangerous for other passengers. But the way I saw it was keeping in mind that I'd already seen one person killed. This was evidence. And I hoped, along with many, if not everyone, that we would somehow, some way get out of this, and we would have evidence. You know, if that weapon had been used to kill somebody, which it may very well have been used, then we would be able to use that weapon as evidence to convict these criminals, these murderers. So it did not feel right to me to throw it into the sea. Okay. So I took it up to the bridge at one point, to the captain, and I said, do you want to hold this? And he was like, get it out of here, you know. So I went around the ship and I tried to find one of the Turks to like give it to them and say, here, you know, keep it as evidence or something. And I couldn't find anybody to take it, and I had it probably for 5 minutes. And I was, you know, just trying to give it to the right person. Eventually I gave up on that, and while I was running around the ship, a bullet ricocheted right around me, and I realized, like, shit, I got down to the ground and started being a Marine. Like, you know, if people are shooting at you, there's a certain way you act to try and protect yourself, and I was obviously a potential target. And eventually what I did was I decided, okay, I'll take the bullets out of the weapon, and I'll put the weapon, I hid it somewhere, and I gave the bullets to some other people. And so that's what I did. As soon as I did that, I hid the weapon, I gave the bullets, and they were real bullets. You know, they were definitely real bullets. And I then went back to go up to the top deck, which is where I had intended to go in the first place. And I was on the other side of the ship, but the same exact spot on the other side of the ship, one deck down from the top deck, and the same exact thing happened again. Another commando had been pushed over the top deck and fell right in front of me. This one was totally alert, completely alert, and when he fell to the ground, he had a submachine gun, and he was reaching and trying to get to that gun, and I have no doubt in my mind whatsoever, if he had gotten to it, if I had been a couple steps back and hadn't given him just a little bit more time, he would have had that weapon, and he would have been firing at anybody around him. But I was there at exactly the right time. And immediately I went for that weapon. He had his hands on it and he was getting ready to fire, and I grabbed his hands and was pulling his hands off of the weapon, and another brother came at that time and he pulled the weapon off of it. It was shoulder strapped. He pulled it off of him. As I pulled his fingers off it, he took the weapon off him, and I believe he did throw that weapon into the sea. And that commando was also taken inside the ship. And it wasn't long after that. And then I think I went into the ship, and I remember making a real point of getting right up in front of these commandos and looking right into their eyes. And this, I wrote about this, you know, what I saw was little frightened children. All the bravado, all of the machismo, all of that melted right away, and they thought they were going to die. They thought we were going to kill them, for sure. They were deathly afraid, and it showed. And by the time I decided that I wanted to go back up, the call came over the PA system from the captain.
Sorry, just a minute, because there is a problem with the toilets. I have to
Sure.
Tout à l'heure, it flew the floor. So. Sorry.
By the time I decided that I would try and get up to the top deck again, the order came down from the captain to stop defending the ship, to surrender. So I never made it to the top deck. And you know, this is an example of many examples I could give in my life, but this is a really profound one where, had I achieved the goal of getting up to the top deck as I had planned, there's a real good chance that I would have been seriously injured or potentially killed. I never made it to the top deck, and this is where of the 9, there's 10 people actually that died. One man was in a coma for a couple of years. But 9 people were killed on that ship, and the best evidence we have in the UN Human Rights Council report detailed that 6 of them had been executed. They were alive but had been shot. The fatal shot came at point blank range, either to the head or to the back. Many of them were, you know, they were on the ground. They were injured. One of them was a 19-year-old kid. An American kid of Turkish descent, an American citizen, a guy named Furkan Doğan, 19-year-old kid who was already enlisted in medical school. He lived in America, he was going back to America, and he was going to medical school, and they shot him a total of 5 times, and he was hit in the foot, in the leg, once in the neck and in the back, but he was alive. He was alive, and there's eyewitness accounts to verify this. And the last shot was a shot at point blank range. While he was on his back, a commando came and stuck the gun right in his face and fired a shot that came right under the right eye. And you could see the tattooing from the muzzle, from the flash, the fire that comes out of a gun when you fire it. He was tattooed there, so it was point blank range, and that was the fatal shot that ended his life. But there were 5 others that were executed as well. So, you know, had I made it up there, it was a dangerous place to be. Mm-hmm. So I was very fortunate, to say the least. And I could go on and on and on about, you know, what happened after that. Let us suffice it to say that they abused us on every level. You know, they beat people, they denied people all sorts of necessary medical attention. Several people, or at least a couple of people, probably died from treatable injuries. If they had been treated in time, they could have been saved, but we were way overwhelmed. We did not have the resources. There were not just the 9 killed, but there were many people seriously injured, bleeding, and needing real medical attention. We were overwhelmed. We did not have the capacity. There was a doctor on board, but there was no way to give the kind of treatment that they needed. So the Israelis just, the way they treated us was incredible. I mean, and definitely Muslim men, bearded, dark-skinned Muslim men, got a different treatment from Westerners. There's no question of that. But I was beaten too, you know, and You know, we just experienced all kinds of abuse, and there's a lot of details to the story that I could get into, but the bottom line is, what I remember most about the whole experience is the incredible feeling of being with people who, despite the madness and the violence and all of this tragedy that was going on around us, we were all completely committed to doing whatever we could to reach the people of Gaza, because we just reached a point where we couldn't accept this and had to do everything we could do. And it was a beautiful, beautiful place to be, despite all of this tragedy, to be with people who felt that way and who were willing to make the same sacrifice as you. There were no heroes. We all basically did everything we could to try and achieve the mission of reaching the people of Gaza and making clear to them that we love them, we care about you, and we will not turn our back on you. It was an amazing place to be.
Okay, thank you for telling us these two stories, because I guess many times you've told this, and I guess it's not so easy for you to talk about this. I would like to finish this talk with you. We will not have time to talk about monetary creation. I know it's an important subject, but I would like to talk about positive topics, and especially the conscious awakeness that maybe you see in USA, in Great Britain. Me, when I say this to my friends, sometimes they say, "You're a dreamer. People are not awake. You take your dreams for reality." And you, what do you notice since 10 years and where you live?
Well, actually, of all the things I've done, I think probably one of the most important things I've done is observe, to be an astute observer of how people react to what is, to me, very obviously one manipulation after another. All of history is one manipulation after another. Even the two great wars, as we call them in Europe, great, whatever, they were manipulations, both of them. Totally unnecessary blood. There's nothing great about it. And, basically we've been manipulated one time after another, one war after another, and we may kid ourselves thinking that, we're on the good side and, blah, 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 but it's just death and suffering and pain and lies and manipulation. That's all it is. And, I started to become really aware in the mid-90s, and so I was observing from that point forward, and so I was already pretty awake and pretty knowledgeable by the time 9/11 came. And I was in America when 9/11 happened, in Hawaii, the stolen nation of Hawaii, which is another story. But anyway, it was painful, painful, because I knew on the day, I didn't know obviously who did it, but I knew from history, I knew about false flags, and I also knew about the Project for a New American Century and full spectrum dominance and all this sort of stuff. And I knew that this was a great gift for the warmongers, and I knew a basic premise of, if you want to understand anything, the first thing you have to ask yourself when some sort of event like this occurs is who benefits? Who benefits? And who's in the best position to carry out such an event? If you're so naive that you don't know that false flags have occurred historically all the time, okay, then you're not going to be able to see what's happening. But
history has no sense when you. It has no sense if you consider that there is no false flag operation in history. It's a success. It's a following of events with no sense.
No.
Together.
No, it doesn't make any sense. Yeah, and on 9/11 was just that. The American people were immediately whipped up into this frenzy of hatred and anger and vengeance, and it was so easy to manipulate them into what they did eventually. But I knew that this was some form of a lie and manipulation, and I was already, by that point, had already renounced my U.S. citizenship. I was in Hawaii. That's a whole story in itself. Some Americans, ignorant people, say, "Oh, you were in America, you didn't." Well, okay, whatever. Then you don't know the history of Hawaii. It's a nation that was stolen. I was a Hawaiian national by that point, and I returned to the stolen nation of Hawaii. But many will say, "Oh, you went back to," well, whatever. I had warrants issued for my arrest because of my activities. I had already made in 2000, early 2001, I had finished a film called The United States of Hypocrisy. It detailed the crime that was committed against the Hawaiian people and nation. I made very serious charges, which I back up 100% in the film, against the United States. The two main charges are fraud, and I showed where they were committing fraud, and more importantly, I showed where they were continuing, and still continue to this day, to carry out a policy of genocide, according to the legal definition of the word. People make a mistake if they think that the only way to commit genocide is to mow people down indiscriminately or bomb everyone. There is another way, and that's exactly the way they're doing it in Hawaii. And the way they're doing it is through something called blood quantum, measuring people's blood, and if it is not to a certain level, then you do not qualify as a Hawaiian. And over time, because Hawaiians will inevitably marry people outside of the Hawaiian bloodline, so if a 100% Hawaiian, full-blooded Hawaiian marries a non-Hawaiian and they have children, the children will have 50% blood quantum. And the law that the United States has had for a long time is that you need to have 50% to be identified as Hawaiian. So if a 50% blood quantum Hawaiian marries someone with less than 50% or no Hawaiian blood, their children will have 25% blood quantum, which means they will no longer be Hawaiians. It doesn't take a genius to figure out that over time there will be no more Hawaiians. You will have gotten rid of them legally. You never even had to fire a shot, but it's genocide by any sensible definition of the word. So I made this charge against the American government in this film, and I back it up with sound thinking. I was already a target. I had warrants issued for my arrest, including an $11,000 bench warrant for my arrest, which means the police could come and get me at any time. And when you look like me and you have an $11,000 bench warrant, I can assure you in America what they do is they don't say you need to come with us. What they do is they pull out their weapon, they point it at your head or your chest and say, get on the ground right now. And if you make one bad move, you know, you could be a dead man very quick. Black people know this very well because they get killed to this, you know, almost every day. And so it was dangerous already for me at that point, and nobody knew me. Outside of America, nobody knew me. All I had done to that point was marine conservation stuff. I had rescued a whole bunch of sea turtles, and I had made a film. So if they had put me in jail, if they found a bunch of drugs, or maybe even explosives in my house, which is easy to do, no problem, that's easily set up. You know, I'd be going to jail for whatever, 10, 20, 30 years of my life, you know, for the rest of my life, and no one would have cared except for my family, and that would have been it. And so when 9/11 happened, you know, I knew that it wasn't what we were being told, and I've never had the ability to keep my mouth shut.
And did you felt alone to be conscious about the real nature, or that there was a big lie behind the 11th September attacks? Were you feeling alone in USA, or because my question was about conscious awakening?
Yes, I've had the benefit of understanding another truth, and that is that we're all connected. The illusion of alone is powerful, but while I felt alone in the sense that there were very few people who looked at it the way I did, then you could feel very alone, but you're not alone. You're not alone, not in real terms. You can't be alone. We're all connected. That can't be changed.
And
so
with the internet, it's more easy also to make some links with the other people. No?
Yes, that too. But for me, it's deeper than that. You know, I mean, I've never felt really alone, per se. I've always felt connected. You know, in some spiritual level, I've always felt that. So, and when you do things based on love and a sense of justice and truth, how can you be alone? You know, you can't really be alone. So I never fell into that trap. I never felt sorry for myself, but I did realize I was a target and I was vulnerable, and I knew that I wouldn't keep my mouth shut. So I had everything. I lived in Hawaii, lived in paradise, had a place on the beach. I lived right on the beach. I had money. I was doing something that I loved, had respect within the community. I left something that most people would dream of having, because I knew I had to go. And that's when I left, 2 months after 9/11, and I went to Holland and I sought political asylum in Holland. I lived in a refugee camp. I managed to get into that system because my case was legitimate. I knew my rights, and the Dutch did everything they could to get me out of it. And I caught them committing fraud, and they were forced to put me into the asylum procedure. And that's the whole story in itself. But it was within a year of that I initiated the Human Shield action to Iraq.
Mm-hmm. So. About consciousness awakeness.
Right.
What is the evolution you've seen since maybe 15, 20 years till now?
So 9/11 would be the seminal moment. It was a very dark time. This huge manipulation occurred. The lie began that it was Muslims who did this. Coke snorting, alcohol drinking, sleeping with stripper, jihadists, blah, blah, blah. A ridiculous story from the off. And people believed it. And so I have continued to observe. So on the day, I was already pretty aware. I didn't have the answers, but I knew this was some sort of manipulation, and it was a dark time. And that lasted for some time. You couldn't even suggest that the American government, or Mossad for that matter, was involved in this. There were plenty of people in America that would want to kill you if you even said such a thing.
Kill you?
Oh yeah, for sure. They'd hate you, they'd want to beat the crap out of you, and some people would definitely want to kill you. I mean, the anger was so strong that a lot of idiot Americans just would really want to kill you.
So it was a dark time. It was hard to have some hope, no?
Well, it was, yes, it was. And that was part of my anger that led me to initiate the Human Shield Act. So I could let the anger consume me, mm-hmm. and that happens to a lot of people. And, it's understandable. But what I did was I channeled that anger into what I felt was the most constructive thing that I could do. And that's how the Human Shield Action was born, out of that anger. And so I've been observing, from even before that period, on 9/11, and since. We've gone from, think about it, in 13 years, 2001, almost uniform ignorance and naivete about the tactic of false flags, and just being completely duped into a bogus war on terror, which in itself was, immediately for me, it was obvious. How can we allow the United States of America, the nation that produces more weapons of mass destruction than anyone else, that distributes those weapons of mass destruction all over the place, including to brutal dictators such as Saddam Hussein, how is it possible that the United States could be fighting a war against a nation based on the accusation that they have weapons of mass destruction, when we're the ones who are giving the weapons of mass destruction to everyone around the planet and making money off it? That in itself was totally absurd. And the idea that we would lead a war on terror, again, was, immediately, how is it possible that this was lost on people? There really was a very high degree of mind control.
I really like the words of Aaron Russo about
From freedom to fascism,
and the war on terror. So yes,
it was pure madness, if you ask me. I mean, the fact that anyone believed this narrative and could seriously support a U.S.-led war on terror, the same U.S. that bombed Hiroshima and Nagasaki, that killed probably 2 to 4 million Asians in Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam, that dropped 20 million bombs on Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia, millions of gallons of Agent Orange, mines all over the place, terror wars with death squads trained by us at the School of the Americas in Nicaragua, El Salvador, Central and South America.
Don't start the list, because
we'll be here forever.
Tomorrow.
The idea that this nation would lead a war on terror was, well, it just shows how ignorant and mind-controlled we must have been. But we've gone from 2001, 13 years ago, 13 years, that's not a very long time. We've gone from a point where you couldn't challenge the narrative to now, if anything like 9/11 happens, immediately there is a huge pool of people who will be dissecting every single element, and people are now almost uniformly aware to one degree or another of at least the tactic of false flags, and large numbers of people, a significant percentage of people, are very aware of the tactic of false flags and aware of historical use of false flags to manipulate us into war. This is one of the most important tactics used to manipulate us, and as long as the human population was ignorant to it, they will forever be subject to the strategy and the utility of this strategy. But when human beings understand the strategy, and not only understand it, but also are prepared and able to investigate and dissect everything, you have just neutralized one of the most important tactics to be able to create and foster war. That in itself is a major, major, major shift. That is hugely significant. Not only that, but the head of the snake is clearly the financial system. And we have gone from a point where virtually nobody was discussing the private control of the issuance of money, the fact that the Federal Reserve Bank is a private bank, nothing federal about it. The government is not even allowed to audit.
It's not anymore a reserve also, because
it's not a reserve, no reserve, and it's not federal. It's not government, it is a private bank, and we're not even allowed to know who the shareholders of this private bank are. We do know who they are, basically. They're Jewish bankers, Jewish banking families, almost assuredly Rothschilds and other banking families who are the private shareholders who own the Federal Reserve. The government isn't even allowed to audit the Federal Reserve Bank. So these people basically can create an infinite supply of money. Back in 2001 and beyond, almost nobody was talking about such things. Now, today, large numbers of people know this. Ron Paul, the presidential candidate from the last couple of presidential elections, had huge support and has been talking about the Federal Reserve. Too many people already know about the private control of the issuance of money for the powers that be to reverse it. They cannot reverse it. And the thing is that while we go through this financial crisis, which is instigated by these same financial criminals, the situation is such that there is no way to reverse that either. It's not going to get more comfortable. We're going to get more and more uncomfortable. And the beauty of being uncomfortable is that all of a sudden you're able to see things that you were not able to see before. When you're really, really comfortable and life is great and you've got your big plasma screen television and you've got, a beer in one hand and the remote control in another hand, and you have to, you can work a cushy job and have a nice car and go on holiday. When you're that comfortable, it's amazing how stupid you can be. But when you get uncomfortable, it's amazing how intelligent you become. Because all of a sudden you have an interest in knowing why in the hell are you having to work 2 jobs just to scrape by.
So, do you think that we had to face this New World Order project to reach a new golden age for humankind?
Yes, I do. I feel that this was a process that was inevitable, that things were always going to come to a head. There was never any way to avoid this, and that's exactly what we're experiencing right now. And if you believe in critical mass or the 100th monkey, if you believe, and I do, we absolutely see evidence of this. What is a thought? It's an electrical impulse. If you think positive thoughts and have a smile on your face, you don't even need to say anything. That has an effect on people around you. It definitely does. And when people are thinking on a more conscious level, it permeates the atmosphere. It has its own impulse, its own energy, and it will, at a certain point, at least this is my belief, it will at a certain point reach that critical mass, and you won't even need to communicate it anymore. It'll just be understood. It'll become self-evident. This is what's happening right now. And we're not that far off from reaching that critical mass where it won't even be necessary to communicate it anymore. It'll simply be understood. And this cannot be reversed. The only hope that the powers that be, the tyrants who run the world through primarily the private control of the issuance of money, the only hope for them is a third world war, if you ask me. They need a third world war desperately. And if you look at the policies, are these people stupid? If you don't want war, you would do the exact opposite of what you're doing. We look at Ukraine. This is a perfect example, Ukraine. I mean, We're making an enemy out of Russia, which Russia is a model of statesmanship, of patience, of wisdom. I mean, the way that they have dealt with the Ukrainian situation is exemplary. It is truly remarkable the way that they have dealt with this situation. Let's reverse it. Let's say that Mexico got $5 billion worth of Russian money spent to stir the shit, and we knew that, America knew that. What would America do in that? Oh my God, we would have invaded immediately, and we would have been bombing, and that's what we would have done. But Russia's not, Ukraine it's on their border. This is their backyard.
It's more than in the border, because Kiev was the mother of Russia.
Exactly.
So it's a part of Russia, and it's quite an artificial country.
It is. And this is another amazing development. There's a strong argument to show that the Soviet Union, Russia, and America were playing a role. That's all. You have your territory, you can do what you want in your little area, and you have your territory. We'll leave you alone, we'll play this little game, this Cold War, this fabrication that never was, to justify increasing the military-industrial complex. We never should have been producing thousands of nuclear weapons. That was always insane. But we could justify it if we have this evil empire that's trying to take over the world with communism. And, that has changed. I feel that is what happened. I don't think Soviet Union was ever really a good guy any more than we were. I think we both just had our own little territory to run our little criminal rackets, and that's what was happening. And now that's changed drastically. It seems very obvious to me that Putin and Russia are not playing the game anymore. What they're doing is not complementary to the goals of the powers that be. And I believe that Putin knows, and this is incredible, that the head of state of such a large and powerful nation is actually aware of this fact and has the kind of integrity not to play along. I don't see how they're playing along at all. I really don't, especially with Syria. They didn't play along with Syria at all. The only reason why we couldn't invade Syria is because of Russia, quite frankly. I mean, Russia saved us from that already. They may not be able to stop this next one, this latest manipulation, but the bottom line is that Russia is not down with the program. This is a huge development, massive development itself. The understanding of finance, private control of finance, and how that is used to manipulate the world. Basically, we give the power to a tiny group of people to buy everything and anyone that can be bought, literally. And they use that power in an extremely destructive way for their own purposes. And this is the way the world functions. Too many people already know about this. You can't reverse it. The only thing that can possibly save the powers that be is a third world war. And everything they're doing indicates that is exactly the plan. Yeah. And so far that has not happened. I am not suggesting that it will not happen. I don't know what's going to happen.
My feeling about this is that the most risky moment was about 2011, 2012, 2013, with the pressure against Syria and Iran, which was the next target. And I think that good people in the high part of Pentagon or on other stuff just refused to attack Syria because they knew that it will create a World War III, and they didn't want that. I think that the more time is passing, the less we have a risk to have a World War III. That's what I believe.
Well, and I would also point out the events of Syria last year were the unprecedented. I am not aware of any point in history where the same tactics that have always been used. I mean, Bashar al-Assad became the latest version of Hitler. I don't even really like using Hitler as an example because there's so much that's misunderstood about World War II and whatnot. But in terms of how people see Hitler, he was the latest Hitler. And we had to go in and we had, and there was just this bombarding of the people of all this propaganda, and a classic false flag, a stupid false flag, in which, after 6 months of inviting UN inspectors to come in and investigate allegations that Bashar al-Assad was so stupid as to use chemical weapons, Bashar al-Assad himself inviting and urging these inspectors to come in, after 6 months of this, they enter Syria, and within little more than 24 hours, the same man, Bashar al-Assad, who invited these people to come and investigate, this chemical weapons, which he clearly wasn't responsible for using, then launches a chemical attack against his own people at a place 10 miles away from where the UN inspector. This is ridiculous. Totally ridiculous. Yet this is what they did, and it didn't work at all. Nobody bought it. And that's remarkable, really remarkable. In America even, there was, from what I heard, 9% approval for escalating things, and that's remarkable. Given the amount of propaganda that was being used, 9%, that's basically nothing. Basically, it's nothing. And it was so incredible because these puppets in the White House and the Congress, who basically just rubber stamp whatever, they just do whatever they're told, it couldn't even go to a vote. I believe the reason why it couldn't go to a vote, and the same thing happened in the Parliament in the UK. I mean, these two, there's never an example where the leadership has been on a war agenda where they haven't gotten what they always get it. Always they get it. And, all it takes is, the rubber stamping of the Parliament or the Congress approving it, and they couldn't even go to a vote, either one of them. I would argue the reason why they couldn't go to a vote was because while the powers that be own these governments, the politicians, they own them, and they could order them to do whatever. They realized that without any consent, virtually no consent, if they order their puppets to go into the Congress, into the Parliament, and vote for a war against almost universal objections, that would beg a possible genuine revolution. Or U.S. patriots marching into the White House and Congress and arresting these traitors. And they knew that.
And they have planned to face it, but it will never happen, I hope.
I believe, they're doing their best and they've made some gains with their latest manipulation, but going back to what happened last year, that is unprecedented. Sure. Unprecedented. And what does it tell you? From my perspective, what's most important about that? While we have salved our conscience to make ourselves feel better about these horrendous policies by saying, that we did what we could, but they did it anyway. The fact is, there is one thing that the powers that be have to have in order to do anything. They have to have this, whether we want to admit it or not, and they have to have one thing, and that is they have to have at least the facade of consent. They have to have at least a certain level of consent. If they have no consent, or virtually no consent, and they do it anyway, this is a massive risk. Massive risk. So this is the lesson, if you ask me. If we are smart enough, then whatever manipulation they use, as long as we don't consent to it, they can't do a damn thing. And that is exactly why they did not do a damn thing in Syria last year. But, to their credit, I have to give them some credit. They created the latest monster of ISIS, and they have created this ridiculous situation, yet another classic example of creating the boogeyman to justify the policy that you want. They've managed to fool a lot of people again. Right now, a lot of people fail to recognize that we're the ones that finance all this crap. These are a bunch of psychopathic mercenaries, and there's nothing Islamic about them. And as soon as the money is cut off, they're done. So if we really want to stop it, then we need to cut off the funding. We don't need to bomb anyone, just cut off the funding. Right now, people don't get that, but I don't believe it will take very long before they will realize that.
To achieve it quickly, do you think that the next step is the creation of a citizen lobby? Because there are lobbies for such bad things. Why shouldn't we have our own lobby?
I think that this would be a useful thing. I think that could be that could have a huge impact. But if you ask me, the one thing that needs to be done above all others is to end the private control of the issuance of money. As long as they have an infinite supply of money, even with a citizen lobby, they will be able to outspend you 1 billion to 1. And it's that money that will give them the power to be able to do these things. Take away the power of the money supply, the game is over. We'll be able to level the playing field very, very quickly. We can sort, and not only that, not only can we prevent all of this tyranny from occurring, but we can go from a state of scarcity, while the powers that be have an infinite supply, we have a very scarce supply. And we all, as people, are fighting for this little bit. And if you take that power away from them, we totally transform that situation into a state of abundance. No longer do we need to fight each other for this scarce amount of resources. That will change everything in itself right there. And we could do this. There is no reason why we cannot do this. It has occurred. We've done this before. Historically, we can go back and we can see this. We can do it again. The Founding Fathers were very clear about this of America. They warned us about private control of the issuance of money. This should only be in the hands of a government that truly represents the will of the people. And if we do that, we can solve all our problems very quickly. So this is part of my optimism. Already too many people know about this money system, this ultimate fraud. Too many people already know. They can't reverse it. And as people become more and more uncomfortable, more and more people are going to learn about it. So it's only a matter of time before too many people know, and that system will be abolished. And once you take away that money from them, what, can they pay the mercenaries all this money? No, they can't. Because they won't have an infinite supply of money, and it won't be something that can't be audited. The money will be supplied for the people, by the people, in a transparent way. So this tiny group of psychopaths will no longer have an infinite supply to be able to pay whatever they want. And they do. This is exactly what they do. That's how they bought everything. They bought all the major corporations, the media, governments, police, courts, all of it. They own all of it. They can bribe as many people as they want. They can pay as many infiltrators, anything they want. There's no problem. It's not about money. It's not about money. They have all the money. When people say, oh, it's all about money. No, it's not. They have all the money. It's about total control.
Control, yes. They use mainly money, but they use also sex.
Yes, they use many methods. They use many tactics to manipulate. And basically what you have in this world right now is a system in which a tiny group of psychopaths have an infinite supply of money. And so when you look at all of these politicians and all of these public figures and all of these people, these experts, these professors, and all these people, actually what you see is the worst of the worst being rewarded with these positions of power. Mm-hmm. Psychopaths and pedophiles and all of these amoral people are the ones that get rewarded. This is the system we have right now, and the world still functions with some level of survivability. It's pretty amazing, actually. You take away that system, and instead of rewarding the corrupt, amoral, pedophile psychopaths, reward people of honor, integrity. Can you imagine how the world will transform when instead of all these criminals being in these positions of public trust, we have people of honor and integrity, and there are a lot of really good people in this world. Wise, strong, honorable people. And those will be the people, when we flip this around, those will be the people in positions of public trust. And people will not recognize the world once we do that. Mm-hmm. It will not even be recognizable. And all these things that they thought were inherent, it was human nature. This is another great con. We are not by nature selfish. We are not by nature greedy. Not at all. We are conditioned to become selfish and greedy. We are by nature as human beings cooperative. Because it is basic common sense from a sane perspective. If you're on your own, if you're selfish and you're only looking out for yourself, guess what? That's a vulnerable place to be. But if we are smart enough to realize that what's good for you is good for me, and we cooperate with each other, we will no longer have to work 40-hour weeks just to scrape by. We could probably work 15-hour weeks and have the rest of the time with our families and have an abundant supply, all with clean drinking water, adequate and healthy food, a roof over our head, time and leisure to be with our loved ones. That's the life we could have tomorrow. We could have that tomorrow.
Okay, let's finish to turn this corrupted circle into a virtuous circle. The job is started, and we will finish it together in the following years. Ken O'Keefe, thank you very much for this interview and for your involvement in all these movements. Thank you very much.
Thank you, brother. Thank you.